8:14 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. An Iranian 14 Tomcat was already at full military power, its twin engines screaming over the turquoise water of the Strait of Hormuz. This was not a routine intercept or a standard patrol. The pilot had locked his radar onto the American carrier strike group and was broadcasting a private, weeping farewell to his family over the international distress frequency. Why was a veteran aviator choosing this moment to say goodbye to his children while diving toward a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier? This was the question that frozen every operator in the region. The morning sun was a pale white disk hanging over the jagged mountains of Iran. Below the fighter, the water was crowded with oil tankers and fishing dhows. They were all oblivious to the supersonic drama unfolding 6,000 feet above them. The air was thick with humidity. It clung to the canopy of the aging Grumman fighter like a damp shroud. Inside the cockpit, Captain Abbas Rezai did not look at his instruments. He looked at a small, laminated photograph of two young girls. It was taped to the edge of his head-up display. His hand trembled on the control stick. 8:15 in the morning. 60 miles to the south, the USS Abraham Lincoln moved steadily through the heavy swells. The carrier was the center of a massive web of steel and silicon. Its sensors were designed to detect and destroy threats from hundreds of miles away. But the Lincoln was currently blind to the pilot's true intent. To the radar operators in the Combat Information Center, the 14 was simply a high-speed track on a collision course. To the world, it was a spark inches away from a massive powder keg. The tension in the region had been building for months. This single flight was the breaking point. The pilot spoke into his oxygen mask. His voice was thick and strained. "Fatima, if you can hear this, tell the girls I love them. Tell them their father was a man of honor. Tell them I had no choice but to follow my soul." The international distress frequency, known as GUARD, was normally reserved for shipwrecks and urgent warnings. Now, it was filled with the sound of a man at the end of his rope. Thousands of sailors across the Gulf heard the transmission. They listened in a stunned, heavy silence. 8:16 in the morning. The radio operator on the carrier responded with professional coldness. "Unknown aircraft on heading 300 at altitude 6,000. You are approaching a United States carrier strike group in international waters. Alter your course immediately to the south, or you will be engaged by defensive systems." Captain Rezai did not acknowledge the warning. He did not change his heading. Instead, he reached down to the center console. He flipped the master arm switch to the armed position. A red light illuminated on his weapon control panel. It cast a bloody glow across his flight suit. The fighter was now live. Its long-range missiles were ready to fly. The American tactical action officer on the Lincoln watched the digital representation of the Iranian jet on his glass screen. The icon changed from a cautious yellow to a hostile red. It was a formal declaration of intent. In the belly of the ship, the power surged to the radar arrays. On the flight deck, the blast deflectors rose with a sudden hiss of high-pressure steam. Two Super Hornets were seconds from a catapult launch. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 8:16 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The room was bathed in a dim blue light. It was designed to reduce glare on the dozens of high-resolution monitors that tracked every movement in the Persian Gulf. The air was cold and dry. It smelled of ozone and recycled air. The tactical action officer stared at the primary radar display. The red icon representing the Iranian 14 was blinking. It was a signal that the aircraft was now broadcasting a fire control radar signature. It was no longer just flying. It was targeting. "He has a solid lock on us," the radar operator said. His voice was tight but controlled. Single target track. "He is painting the ship with his AWG-9 radar." The admiral stepped into the center of the room. He moved with a practiced calm. He looked at the main screen. The Iranian jet was 60 miles away and closing fast. At Mach 0.9, that distance was disappearing at a rate of 10 miles every minute. "Talk to me about the broadcast," the admiral said. The communications officer adjusted his headset. "Sir, he is still on guard. He is ignoring our warnings. He is repeating the same names. Fatima, Yasmin. He is crying, sir. It sounds like a final step. The admiral leaned over the console. Is it a recording? Could this be a digital deception? A way to keep us from firing while he gets into launch range? The technical analysis says it is live, the communications officer replied. The background noise matches the cockpit of a Tomcat at high speed. The stress in his voice is consistent with a human in extreme emotional distress. 8:17 in the morning. Across the water, inside the hardened bunker of the Iranian Air Force Command at Bandar Abbas, the situation was equally chaotic. General Hassan Karami stood before a bank of tactical displays. His face was pale. He had known Captain Abbas Rezai for 15 years. Rezai was not a radical. He was a professional. He was a man who followed orders without question. This sudden deviation was a nightmare for the Iranian High Command. "Get him on the secure line," Karami ordered. "Sir." "He has disconnected his encryption modules," the radio technician said. "He is not receiving our signals. He has bypassed the military frequencies entirely. He is only listening to the open air. He is out of our control." The general looked at the clock. If the American carrier felt truly threatened, it would defend itself. If it fired, the Iranian government would be forced to retaliate. A single pilot's mental break was about to trigger a regional war that neither side actually wanted. "He is a dead man," Karami whispered to himself. "If the Americans do not kill him, we will have to." The general knew the rules of engagement. If one of his pilots turned rogue and threatened a nuclear carrier, the protocol was to eliminate the threat before it caused an international catastrophe. But Rezai was flying the most advanced interceptor in the Iranian inventory. He was one of their best. 8:18 in the morning. Back on the Lincoln, the tension reached a new level. The hum of the ship's massive engines seemed to grow louder as the crew prepared for a fight. "Launch the alert birds," the admiral commanded. On the flight deck, the yellow-shirted catapult crew gave the signal. A roar of jet exhaust shook the entire vessel. An Fa-18 Super Hornet shot forward into the humid air. It was followed seconds later by its wingman. The two American fighters climbed steeply. They banked to the north. Their mission was clear. They were to intercept the Iranian Tomcat. They were authorized to use force if the pilot did not break his lock. The tactical display showed the two blue icons racing toward the single red one. The intercept would happen in less than 3 minutes. The pilot's voice came over the speakers again. It was weaker now. "The world is too loud. I just want to go home. I am coming home." The Combat Information Center went silent. The words did not sound like a threat. They sounded like a surrender to despair, but the radar lock remained. The weapons were still armed. The machines of war did not care about the pilot's broken heart. 8:18 in the morning. The sky over the Persian Gulf. The two American Fa-18 Super Hornets, call signs Raven 11 and Raven 12, tore through the humid haze at 30,000 feet. Their engines were at full afterburner. The pilots could feel the vibration of the massive power through their flight suits. They were closing the gap with the Iranian Tomcat at over 700 miles per hour. Below them, the sea was a blur of steel gray and white foam. The lead pilot, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Viper Jensen, checked her tactical display. The Iranian jet was now less than 15 miles away. It was a straight line. No maneuvers, no attempts to hide. It was the flight profile of a cruise missile, not a fighter pilot. Viper spoke into her mask. "Mercury, this is Raven 11. We have a radar lock on the contact. He is at 12 o'clock. 10 miles. Altitude, 5,000. He is still accelerating." The controller back on the USS Abraham Lincoln responded immediately. "Raven 11, Mercury. You are cleared to close and perform a visual identification. Do not fire unless fired upon, or, if the contact crosses the 5-mile inner defense bubble, how is the audio on guard?" Viper adjusted her radio priority. The sound of Captain Rezai's voice filled her helmet. He was reciting a poem now. It was a Farsi verse about the end of the world and the sweetness of the desert. "The audio is disturbing, Mercury," Viper said. "He sounds completely detached. He is not reacting to our presence." 8:20 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the Iranian 14, the environment was a symphony of mechanical stress. The old airframe groaned under the pressure of Mach 1.2. The wind noise around the canopy was a deafening roar. Captain Rezai ignored it. He was looking at his fuel gauge. He had enough for another 10 minutes of high-speed flight. That was all he needed. He keyed his radio again. "Yasmin, my little star, do not look at the sky today. Just remember the garden. Remember the tea we had under the lemon tree. I am sorry I could not be the man you needed. The weight of the uniform is too much. The weight of the world is too much." He reached forward and adjusted his radar. He tightened the lock on the American carrier. The digital diamond on his head-up display sat perfectly over the center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. He was not looking for a fight. He was looking for a destination. 8:21 in the morning. On the bridge of the Lincoln, the admiral stood next to the tactical action officer. The entire ship was now at general quarters. 5,000 sailors were at their battle stations. The massive bronze doors of the magazines were locked. The fire teams were dressed in their silver flash gear. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the radar consoles. "He is inside 20 miles, the tactical action officer said. "The Aegis system has a firing solution. We can take him down with a single standard missile too." The admiral looked out the thick windows toward the horizon. He could not see the jet yet, but he could feel the threat. "Wait, if we kill a man who is clearly having a mental breakdown, we give the hardliners in Tehran exactly what they want. We give them a martyr. We give them a reason to close the strait." "Sir," the officer replied, "if those Phoenix missiles leave his rails, we have less than 30 seconds to react. We cannot bet the lives of 5,000 sailors on a pilot's poetry." The admiral did not blink. "Tell Raven 11 to get in his face. I want a head-on intercept. Wake him up." In the air, Viper pushed her stick forward. Her Super Hornet dived toward the Iranian Tomcat. She moved into a position just 500 feet off his left wing. She could see the individual rivets on the Iranian plane. She could see the desert camo paint peeling off the wings. And then she saw the pilot. Captain Rezai turned his head. He looked directly at her. His visor was up. His face was a mask of tears and exhaustion. He did not wave. He did not threaten. He simply turned back to his instruments and pushed the throttle even further forward. 8:21 in the morning. The Iranian Air Force Command Center at Bandar Abbas. General Karami stood motionless before the glowing tactical map. The red dot representing the 14 was moving with a terrifying, singular purpose. It was crossing the maritime boundary. It was entering the exclusion zone established by the American fleet. The general picked up a black telephone. It was a direct line to the Supreme Command in Tehran. His hand was white where he gripped the receiver. "He is not responding to the encrypted burst," the technician shouted, over the noise of the busy operations floor. "He has physically pulled the circuit breakers for the military data link. He has isolated the cockpit. He is only receiving on the international distress frequency. He is listening to the Americans. He is listening to the civilian traffic. But he is not listening to us." This was the strategic nightmare. The Iranian command had lost the ability to order their own pilot to stand down. To the world, it looked like an act of state-sponsored aggression. To the men in this room, it was a rogue element they could not stop. General Karami knew that if the American carrier was forced to defend itself, the political fallout would be catastrophic. The hardliners in the capital would not care about the pilot's mental state. They would see a hero shot down by an imperialist power. They would demand a retaliatory strike. 8:23 in the morning. Back on the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the electronic warfare officer made a sudden realization. He looked up from his console. "Admiral, we have a signature change. The Iranian pilot is not using his satellite link. He is essentially flying blind to his own command. He has hardwired his radio to the guard frequency. He is making sure everyone in the Persian Gulf hears his final words." The admiral leaned back against the command chair. "So he is not just attacking us. He is performing. He is making the world watch his suicide." "Sir," the tactical action officer interrupted. "The Super Hornets are reporting that the contact has increased speed to Mach 1.3. He is heating up. The skin of that Tomcat is glowing on our infrared sensors. He is 30 miles out. At this speed, he will be in the inner defense zone in less than 2 minutes. The tension in the Combat Information Center was a physical weight. The air seemed to grow thinner with every second that passed on the digital clock. On the main screen, the weapon status for the ship's surface-to-air missiles turned green. It was waiting for a human to press the button. 8:24 in the morning. The voice of Captain Rezai returned to the radio. It was no longer a weep. It was a low, steady chant. He was reciting the names of the dead. He was naming pilots lost in the long wars of the past. He was naming neighbors. He was naming friends. It was a litany of grief broadcast across 5,000 square miles of ocean. In the cockpit of her Super Hornet, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen watched the Iranian pilot. She was flying so close she could see the vibration in his vertical stabilizers. The 14 was an old aircraft. It was being pushed far beyond its design limits. Metal panels on the wings were beginning to flutter. Mercury. "This is Raven 1-1, she said. Her voice was calm despite the adrenaline. "The contact is beginning to break up. He is pushing the airframe too hard. If he does not slow down, the plane will disintegrate before he even reaches the ship. But he is still holding the lock. He is still pointing at the Lincoln." "Copy, Raven," the controller replied. "Be advised. The Admiral has authorized the final warning. If he does not break by 20 miles, you are cleared to engage with Sidewinders. Protect the high-value asset at all costs." Viper looked at the man in the cockpit next to her. She saw him close his eyes for a long second. He was a human being in a machine of war, and in 60 seconds, she would have to kill him. 8:21 in the morning, 2,000 feet above the Gulf of Oman. The two Super Hornets were now less than 50 feet from the Iranian Tomcat. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen, known as Viper, held her aircraft in a rock-steady formation. The wake turbulence from the larger 14 buffeted her jet. She adjusted her throttles with minute, instinctive movements. Through her canopy, she had a clear, unobstructed view into the Iranian cockpit. She keyed her radio to the internal fleet frequency. "Mercury, Raven 1-1, has visual. Confirming contact is a Lima model Tomcat. 2 external fuel tanks, 2 Phoenix missiles on the belly rails. Master arm appears to be hot. I can see the glow of his cockpit displays from here." "Copy, Raven," the controller replied. "What about the pilot?" Viper leaned slightly to the left, straining against her shoulder harnesses. "I repeat, visor is up. He is not wearing his oxygen mask properly. I can see his face clearly. He is weeping. His eyes are fixed straight ahead. He is not looking at us. He is not looking at his mirrors. He is in a trance." 8:22 in the morning. Inside the Iranian fighter, Captain Abbas Rezai was no longer aware of the 2 American jets flanking him. The world had shrunk to the size of a radar scope. The green sweep of the AWG-9 radar was the only thing that felt real. Every time the line passed over the American carrier, a high-pitched, steady tone rang in his ears. It was the sound of a lock. It was the sound of a final decision. He spoke into the open air of the cockpit. He knew the radio was transmitting. "The sea is so wide. I thought I could fly across it and leave the weight behind. But the weight follows. It follows in the fuel lines. It follows in the oxygen. Fatima. Do not let them say I was a traitor. Tell them I was just tired. I was so very tired of the watching, of the waiting for a war that never starts and never ends." The sound of his heavy, ragged breathing was broadcast to every ship within 200 miles. It was the sound of a man drowning in the sky. 8:23 in the morning. On the USS Abraham Lincoln, the atmosphere was suffocating. The Admiral stood behind the weapons console. He watched the range counter. 22 miles. 21 miles. The Iranian jet was seconds away from the 5-mile inner defense bubble. This was the line of no return. If a hostile aircraft crossed that line with a radar lock, the automated systems of the ship would take over. The human element would be removed. The ship would defend itself with a wall of lead and interceptor missiles. "Electronic warfare is reporting a change in the Iranian radar," the officer shouted. "He is shifting to high-pulse repetition frequency. He is preparing for a missile launch." He is not just tracking us anymore. He is calculated for a shot. The Admiral gripped the edge of the table. Raven 1-1. This is Mercury. You are cleared for a non-kinetic intervention. Cross his nose. Give him the wash. Try to break his flight path. If he does not deviate in 10 seconds, you are cleared to engage. 8:24 in the morning. Viper did not hesitate. She slammed her throttles into full afterburner. The roar of her engines was a physical blow. She pulled her stick hard to the right, crossing directly in front of the Iranian Tomcat's nose. The massive turbulence of her jet wash slammed into the older plane. The 14 rocked violently. Its left wing dipped toward the water. For a moment, it looked like the jet would stall and fall into the sea. But Rezai fought the controls. With a scream of straining metal, the Tomcat leveled out. He did not turn away. He did not slow down. He corrected his course and pointed his nose right back at the center of the carrier. He was now 15 miles out. He is not braking, Viper reported. Her voice was sharp now. The empathy was gone, replaced by the cold reality of the mission. Mercury, I am moving into a firing position. I have a tone. I have a sidewinder lock. The Admiral looked at the screen. The red icon was nearly touching the edge of the inner circle. He looked at the tactical action officer. The officer's hand was hovering over the fire enable switch. 10 seconds, the officer whispered. The entire bridge held its breath. The only sound was the weeping of a man on the radio, 3,000 feet above the waves. 8:25 in the morning. The starboard sponson of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The Phalanx close-in weapon system came to life with a mechanical growl. The white, dome-shaped radar housing swiveled toward the north. The 6-barrel Gatling gun tracked the sky with a robotic, jerky precision. It was designed to create a wall of tungsten in the path of inbound missiles. Now, it was aimed at a man. Inside the ship, the sound of the electric motors was a high-pitched whine that cut through the low rumble of the engines. The system was in its most aggressive state. It was waiting for the target to cross the 5-mile line. In the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere was frozen. The tactical action officer gripped the edges of his metal console. His knuckles were white. Target is at 8 miles, closing at 1,200 feet per second. The fire control solution is 99%. The Admiral stood behind him. He could smell the ozone from the electronics. He could hear the rapid, shallow breathing of the young sailors around him. The air was heavy with the knowledge of what was about to happen. If they fired, the long piece of the Persian Gulf would end in a spray of fire and debris. The bridge is reporting visual contact, the officer said. We have the smoke trail. He is coming in low and fast. The Admiral looked at the range counter. 7 miles, 6.5. The red icon on the screen was now overlapping the outer edge of the carrier's physical silhouette. Wait, the Admiral whispered. It was a command to himself as much as to his crew. 8:25 and 30 seconds in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the 14, Captain Abbas Rezai was at the center of a hurricane. The aging fighter was shaking so violently that he could no longer read his smaller gauges. The canopy glass was vibrating against its frame. The heat from the engines was radiating through the bulkhead behind his seat. He felt the massive weight of the G-forces pressing him into the padding. His hand moved to the flight stick. His thumb hovered over the red weapons release button. The tone in his ears was a solid, piercing scream. It was the sound of a perfect radar lock. He had the carrier. He had the center of the world in his sights. Fatima, he gasped. The word was barely audible over the roar of the wind. Forgive me. Forgive me for leaving you in this place. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He felt the cold metal of the trigger beneath his thumb. He began to apply pressure. 8:26 in the morning. At 30 feet away, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen saw the motion. She saw the pilot's thumb move. Mercury. This is Raven 1-1. He is at the trigger. I repeat, he is at the trigger. I am engaging. I am engaging now. Viper slammed her finger onto her own launch button. The master arm was hot. The Sidewinder missile on her right wing tip was slaved to her helmet. All she had to do was look at him, and the missile would do the rest. The rocket motor was primed. The seeker head was locked onto the white-hot exhaust of the Tomcat. 5 miles, the tactical action officer shouted on the Lincoln. He is inside the bubble. CIWS is engaging. On the deck of the carrier, the Gatling gun began to spin. The sound was like a giant piece of silk being torn in half. A stream of tracer rounds began to reach out into the morning haze. The red glow of the bullets arched toward the inbound fighter. The world seemed to slow down. The admiral watched the screen. Viper watched the pilot. Captain Rezai watched the photograph of his daughters. The distance between peace and war was now measured in inches. 8, 26, and 10 seconds in the morning. The wall of tungsten from the Phalanx Gatling gun sliced through the air just hundreds of feet in front of the Iranian fighter. The tracers were a brilliant, terrifying red against the morning sky. In the cockpit of her Super Hornet, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen had her finger halfway through the pressure of the trigger. The Sidewinder missile was a heartbeat away from ignition. Then, the frequency changed. The sound of Captain Rezai's weeping was suddenly suppressed by a powerful, high-gain signal. It was not a military broadcast. It was a patched-through civilian cellular line, distorted and crackling with static. A woman's voice, sharp with panic and love, flooded the guard frequency. Abbas. Abbas. Look at me. It is Fatima. I am here. The effect was instantaneous. The Iranian Tomcat jolted as the pilot's hand jerked on the stick. The nose of the aircraft pulled up 5 degrees. The radar lock on the American carrier flickered and broke. The steady, piercing tone of the weapon system died, replaced by the desperate breathing of a woman on the ground in Bandar Abbas. Cease fire. Cease fire. The admiral's voice thundered through the Combat Information Center of the Abraham Lincoln. The Gatling guns on the sponson fell silent. The barrels were still spinning, smoking from the heat of the discharge. The stream of tracers vanished. The silence that followed was more deafening than the roar of the guns. 8:26 and 40 seconds in the morning. 8:26 and 40 seconds in the morning. Inside the Iranian cockpit, Captain Rezai stared at his radio display. His eyes were wide. The photograph of his daughters seemed to glow in the sunlight. Fatima? How? How are you here? The general brought me, she said. Her voice was shaking, but she was forcing herself to be steady. Abbas, listen to my voice. The girls are in the garden. They are waiting for you to come home and fix the swing. Do you hear me? The swing is broken, Abbas. Only you can fix it. General Karami stood in the bunker at Bandar Abbas, holding the patch cable to the radio transmitter with his own hand. He had broken every protocol in the Iranian military to make this happen. He had sent a security detail to Rezai's home and rushed the woman to the base. It was a desperate, unauthorized gamble to save a friend and prevent a war. 8:27 in the morning. The 2 American Super Hornets remained in a tight formation around the Tomcat. Viper kept her sensors locked on the Iranian jet. She could see the pilot's head moving. He was looking around the cockpit as if waking up from a deep sleep. Mercury. This is Raven 1-1, Viper said. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. The contact has broken his radar lock. I repeat, the lock is gone. The contact has broken his radar lock. I repeat, the lock is gone. He is level at 4,000 feet. He is slowing down. He is at Mach 0.8. On the bridge of the Lincoln, the admiral slumped into his chair. He wiped a hand across his forehead. Keep the Ravens on him. Do not let him turn back toward the ship, but do not fire. Let them talk. Abbas. Fatima's voice came over the radio again. The sun is out. It is a beautiful day. Please, turn the plane around. Come back to the land. Come back to us. Captain Rezai looked out his canopy. For the first time in 30 minutes, he saw the American fighters. He saw the pilot in the closest jet. He saw her helmet, the gray paint, and the lethal missiles hanging from her wings. He looked down at the red arming light on his console. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached out and flipped the master arm switch to the off position. The red light went dark. The Iranian pilot spoke one more time. His voice was no longer that of a soldier or a martyr. It was the voice of a man who had seen the edge and stepped back. I am turning, Fatima. I am coming home. The Tomcat began a slow, wide bank to the north. It moved away from the carrier. It moved away from the fire. The immediate crisis had passed, but the world was still watching. 8:28 in the morning. The sky over the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian 14 Tomcat was no longer a screaming dart of steel. It was a wounded bird. The pilot had pulled the throttles back out of afterburner. The sudden drop in engine noise was audible even over the radio. The aircraft was slowing down, its wings sweeping forward as it shed speed. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen kept her Super Hornet exactly 300 feet behind the Iranian jet. She watched the control surfaces of the Tomcat move with a heavy, sluggish rhythm. The pilot was no longer fighting the sky. He was letting the aircraft breathe. Abbas, Fatima's voice was softer now. The frantic edge had been replaced by a quiet, desperate authority. Do you remember the day we walked in the hills near Shiraz? You said the air there was the only thing that made you feel free. You do not need the jet to be free, Abbas. You only need to come home. In the cockpit, Captain Rezai wiped his face with the back of his flight glove. The salt from his tears stung his eyes. He looked at the radar screen. The massive pulse of the American carrier was still there, but the red targeting diamond was gone. He had broken the loop. He had stepped out of the machine. "I am coming home, Fatima," he whispered. "But the sky is very crowded. There are others here with me." 8:30 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln was a tomb of silent observation. Every technician sat with their hands hovering over their keyboards. They were watching the blue and red icons on the main display. The red dot was now moving at 250 knots. It was heading 350, directly toward the Iranian coastline. The admiral stood with his arms crossed. He did not look at the map. He looked at the transcript of the guard frequency scrolling on a side monitor. He is compliant, but he is still a foreign combatant in contested airspace. Tactical. What is the status of the Iranian mainland? Sir, the officer replied, we are seeing a massive increase in activity at Bandar Abbas. They are spinning up their surface-to-air missile batteries. They are likely worried we are going to chase them into their territory. The entire grid is lighting up like a Christmas tree. This was the new danger. The individual crisis was resolving, but the systemic gears of war were still turning. If the American Super Hornets followed Rezai too close to the coast, the Iranian air defense operators might see it as an incoming strike. A single nervous finger on a missile button on the shore could restart the countdown to a global conflict. 8:32 in the morning. Inside the bunker at Bandar Abbas, General Karami felt the cold sweat on his neck. He looked at his own radar operators. Do not lock the Americans. I repeat, do not engage the escorts. They are seeing him home. If we paint them with our fire control radar, they will fire. Everyone stay calm. Stand down the batteries to search mode only. He looked at the woman sitting in the chair next to the radio console. Fatima was pale. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She was still speaking to her husband, her voice a low, rhythmic murmur of domestic details. She was telling him about the dinner she was planning. She was telling him about a book their daughter had finished. She was building a bridge of ordinary life across an ocean of military tension. 8:33 in the morning. Viper checked her fuel state. She was getting low. Mercury. This is Raven 1-1. We are nearing the 12-mile limit. The contact is stable. He is descending to 3,000 feet. He has his landing gear down. I think he is done. Copy, Raven, the Lincoln responded. Maintain visual until the 10-mile mark. Then break away and return to the pattern. Do not cross the line. We do not want to give them an excuse. Viper looked over at the Tomcat one last time. The sun caught the canopy of the Iranian jet. For a brief second, she saw the pilot raise a hand. It was not a gesture of defiance. It was a tired, simple wave. It was one pilot acknowledging another across a divide that should have been a graveyard. Viper banked her Super Hornet to the south. Good luck, Raven. See you in the pattern. The Iranian jet continued north alone. The radar on the Lincoln tracked him until he merged with the land clutter of the coast. The immediate threat was gone. But the silence that followed was not one of relief. It was the heavy, uncertain quiet of a world that had just looked into the abyss and realized how easy it was to fall. 8:35 in the morning. The coastline of Iran. The Iranian 14 Tomcat crossed the surf line at 3,000 feet. Below, the white sand of the beaches gave way to the rugged, sun-bleached mountains of the mainland. For Captain Abbas Rezai, the sight of the familiar terrain was not a comfort. It was a reminder of the reality he had tried to escape. He looked at his fuel state. The needles were hovering near empty. The warning lights for low fuel pressure were blinking a steady, rhythmic amber on his right-hand console. The machine was dying. He keyed his radio, but he did not speak to the Americans this time. He switched his frequency back to the internal military channel. Bandar Abbas Tower. This is Echo November 11, requesting emergency landing. My engines are at critical fuel levels. I am making a straight-in approach. The response from the tower was immediate and cold. Echo November 11. You are cleared for runway 26. Be advised, security forces are standing by on the taxiway. You are ordered to shut down engines immediately upon touchdown. Do not exit the aircraft until instructed. Rezai did not argue. He did not explain. He simply lowered his landing gear. The heavy clunk of the three wheels locking into place vibrated through the floorboards. He was no longer a warrior. He was a man trying to land a broken airplane before it became a coffin. 8:38 in the morning. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the admiral watched the secondary radar screen. The red icon representing the Tomcat was now deep over Iranian territory. It was moving toward the airfield at Bandar Abbas. The threat to the carrier was over. Status of the Ravens? The admiral asked. Raven 1-1 and 1-2 are 5 minutes from the ship, sir, the tactical action officer replied. They are entering the landing pattern. Their fuel is also low, but they are within safe margins. The admiral took a long breath. He felt the weight of the last 20 minutes pressing down on his shoulders. He looked around the bridge. The young sailors were starting to relax. The rigid, robotic posture of combat was melting away, replaced by the slumped shoulders of exhaustion. Stand down from general quarters, the admiral commanded. Revert to condition 3. Keep the electronic warfare team on high alert for the next hour. I want to know the second that Tomcat touches the ground. Aye, sir. Reverting to condition 3. The announcement echoed through the ship. Set condition 3 throughout the ship. All hands, stand down from general quarters. Throughout the massive carrier, thousands of men and women began to unbuckle their helmets and remove their flash gear. The high-pitched whine of the weapons systems began to cycle down. The Lincoln was no longer a fortress of iron. It was once again a floating city, returning to its long, tedious vigil. 8:42 in the morning. The 14 touched down. On the runway at Bandar Abbas with a puff of blue smoke, the tires screamed as they gripped the hot asphalt. Rezai pulled the throttles to idle. The engines gave one final, coughing whine, and then went silent. He didn't even have enough fuel left to taxi to the hangar. The jet rolled to a stop in the middle of the runway. Rezai sat in the cockpit. The silence was absolute. He could hear the ticking of the cooling metal in the engines. He could hear his own heartbeat. Outside, he saw the dust clouds of approaching military vehicles. Several black SUVs and a truck filled with armed guards were racing toward him. He reached up and unlatched his canopy. The humid, heavy air of Iran rushed into the cockpit. It smelled of jet fuel and salt. He looked at the photograph of his daughters one last time. He reached out, peeled the tape away, and tucked the picture into his pocket, into the pocket of his flight suit, over his heart. He raised his hands above his head. He did not look at the guards. He looked at the sky he had just left. It was a vast, empty blue. It looked the same as it had 30 minutes ago. The world had almost ended, but the sky had not noticed. 9 o'clock in the morning. The tarmac at Bandar Abbas. The heat rising from the runway created a shimmering distortion around the 14 Tomcat. Captain Abbas Rezai stood on the wing of his aircraft. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He looked down at the semicircle of Revolutionary Guard soldiers pointing rifles at him. Their faces were hidden behind tactical masks. They did not see a hero returning from a mission. They saw a man who had nearly started a war without orders. Rezai climbed down the ladder slowly. His movements were stiff. He reached the ground and immediately felt the rough grip of two soldiers. They forced his arms behind his back. The metal of the handcuffs was cold against his skin. He did not resist. He looked toward the control tower. He could not see Fatima, but he knew she was there. He knew she had saved him. He also knew that his life as a pilot was over. A senior officer stepped forward. He did not speak. He reached out and ripped the unit patches from Rezai's shoulders. The sound of the Velcro tearing was sharp in the quiet morning air. They led him toward a waiting van. As the doors slammed shut, the only sound left on the runway was the ticking of the cooling jet engines. The Tomcat sat abandoned in the sun. It was a relic of a conflict that had been avoided by the narrowest of margins. 9:15 in the morning. Inside the command bunker, General Karami watched the van drive away. He turned to Fatima. She was still sitting by the radio console. She looked small in the massive, high-tech room. The general walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "He is alive," Karami said. His voice was weary. "That is more than I could have promised 20 minutes ago." Fatima looked up at him. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "What will happen to him now?" The general looked at the primary tactical screen. The American carrier was already moving further away from the coast. There will be an inquiry. There will be questions about his stability. But today, the world did not burn. I will do what I can for him. But for now, you must go home to your daughters. 9:30 in the morning. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the atmosphere was one of professional exhaustion. There was no cheering. There was no celebration. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had just walked through a minefield and reached the other side. They knew that the long peace was a fragile thing. The admiral stood by the window, looking out at the wake of the ship. The two Super Hornets had landed and were being towed to their parking spots on the flight deck. He saw Lieutenant Commander Jensen exit her cockpit. She took off her helmet and shook out her hair. She looked toward the bridge for a brief second. There was no salute, only a mutual understanding of the weight they had both carried. The tactical action officer approached the admiral. "Sir, all systems have reverted to standby. The Iranian land-based radars have dropped their locks. Intelligence says the pilot is in custody. They are classifying it as a personal medical emergency." "A medical emergency," the admiral repeated. He looked at the vast, empty horizon. That is a very polite way to describe a man's soul breaking at 30,000 feet. "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "The official reports will be filed by noon. Washington is already asking for the sensor data. They want to know exactly how close he got. Tell them he got close enough to see our faces," the admiral said. "And tell them we were close enough to see his." The crisis was fully resolved. The machines of war were being cleaned and refueled. The digital records were being backed up. But for the men and women who had heard the weeping on the guard frequency, the mourning would never truly end. They had seen the human heart beneath the camouflage. They had seen how easily a button can be pressed and how much harder it is to let go. 6 hours later. 2:15 in the afternoon. The Persian Gulf. The admiral sat in his small, windowless office, deep within the hull of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The room was quiet. The only sound was the low, constant hum of the ship's ventilation system. On the desk in front of him sat a thick folder of signal intelligence and a glass of cold water. He was no longer wearing his command cap. His silver hair was disheveled. He looked like a man who had spent the last several hours looking at a ghost. A commander from Naval Intelligence knocked and entered the room. He held a tablet with the latest satellite imagery and decrypted cables. "Sir, we have a preliminary profile on the pilot. Captain Abbas Rezai. He was a 19-year veteran of the Islamic Republic of Iran Air Force, one of their most experienced Tomcat instructors." The admiral took the tablet. "Any history of political instability?" "None," the commander replied. "Quite the opposite. He was considered a model officer. However, our human intelligence sources in Shiraz are reporting a personal crisis. His youngest daughter, the one he named on the radio, was diagnosed with a terminal heart condition 4 months ago. The family had been denied an exit visa for medical treatment in Europe 3 times. The last rejection came yesterday afternoon." The admiral leaned back. He looked at the transcript of the guard frequency. "He wasn't attacking us. He was trying to force a conclusion. He wanted the world to see his grief because he felt invisible. Whatever his intent, the commander said, the Pentagon is calling it the closest we have come to a shooting war in 30 years. The Aegis system was 2 seconds away from an automatic launch. If he had crossed that 5-mile line by another 100 yards, the ship's computers would have killed him before you could have said a word. 7 o'clock in the evening. Washington and Tehran. The strategic fallout was moving faster than the tactical one. For the first time in 3 years, the direct hotline between the two governments was active. The message from the American State Department was firm but measured. They were characterizing the event as an isolated incident involving a rogue pilot. They were not seeking escalation. Tehran responded with a carefully worded statement. They thanked the American commander for his restraint. It was a rare, almost unprecedented moment of public gratitude between two adversaries. Both sides realized that they had been held hostage by the mental state of a single man. The incident exposed a terrifying truth in modern warfare. The most advanced sensors and the most powerful weapons in the history of the world were still subject to the unpredictable nature of the human heart. Military analysts would spend the next several weeks dissecting every second of the encounter. They would look at the response times of the Super Hornets. They would study the tracking data from the close-in weapon system. But the real lesson was not in the technology. It was in the silence that followed the woman's voice on the radio. 8 o'clock in the evening. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen sat in the darkened wardroom of the carrier. She was staring at a cup of coffee. She had been debriefed for 4 hours. Her flight recorders had been pulled and sent to Washington. She had been asked exactly why she didn't pull the trigger when she saw the pilot's thumb move. "I saw his face," she had told the investigators. "I didn't see a target. I saw a man who was already dead inside." She looked out the small porthole at the black water of the Gulf. Somewhere to the north, in a prison cell or a military hospital, Abbas Rezai was waiting for his fate. He had lost his wings. He had lost his freedom. But for 10 minutes, he had made two of the most powerful nations on Earth listen to the name of his daughter. The admiral stood on the bridge of the Lincoln, looking at the stars. The ship was still moving. The mission continued. But the air felt different. The tension had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. They were all still waiting for a war. But tonight, they knew exactly how much that war would cost. 3 days later, 8 o'clock in the morning, the USS Abraham Lincoln was steaming toward the Arabian Sea. It moved at a steady 20 knots through a calm and glassy ocean. On the flight deck, the morning sun was already hot. Sailors in colored jerseys moved with practiced efficiency. They were preparing for a day of routine training flights. The high-tension drama of 72 hours ago felt like a distant memory. It was a story told in the mess decks and whispered in the berthing areas, but in the quiet offices of the Pentagon and the high command in Tehran, the event was being analyzed with a terrifying intensity. A final strategic assessment was drafted by the Naval Intelligence Team. It was a document of cold facts and digital logs. It noted that the Aegis combat system had performed perfectly. The radar had tracked the target from the moment it left the coast. The weapons had been primed and ready. The math of the engagement was flawless. But the report also contained a section that was unusual for a military document. It focused on the human factor. The analysts noted that the crisis was not resolved by a superior weapon or a faster computer. It was resolved by a civilian phone patch and a woman's voice. This was the vulnerability that no amount of defense spending could fix. The most advanced sensors in the world could not detect the grief of a father or the desperation of a man who felt he had no other choice. The incident had proven that the machinery of war was far more efficient than the diplomacy of peace. The gap between a radar lock and a missile launch was now measured in seconds. In those seconds, there was no room for error. Captain Abbas Rezai was no longer a pilot in the Iranian Air Force. Intelligence reports suggested he had been moved to a military hospital near the Caspian Sea. There would be no public trial. There would be no execution. To the Iranian government, Rezai was an embarrassment that needed to be erased. He was quietly retired for medical reasons. His name was removed from the active duty rosters. He was alive, and for the first time in years, he was a private citizen. He was a man who had almost started a world war just to be heard. The American admiral sat in his cabin and signed the final after-action report. He thought about the pilot. He thought about the weeping on the radio. He realized that the long peace of the modern era was a fragile illusion. It was held together by thousands of individuals who chose, every single day, not to fire. It was a peace maintained by restraint rather than strength. Modern warfare is often described as a game of math and physics. It is a world of range, speed, and probability. But the morning of the guard frequency farewell proved that the most powerful element in any conflict is the human decision. The line between a normal day and a global catastrophe is not a border on a map. It is the distance between a trigger and a finger. It is the silence between a warning and a response. The Persian Gulf remained a place of tension and shadows. The ships continued to patrol. The jets continued to fly. But for the men and women who had been on the bridge of the Lincoln that morning, the world felt smaller and much more dangerous. They knew the truth now. They knew that behind every radar return and every red icon on a screen, there was a human heart. And sometimes, that heart was enough to stop the world. The morning was still quiet. For now, the peace held.